it going? No, there we go. Okay. And now we'll just transition back to there. All right, and that's up. All right, guys. I'm going to assume that you are in. Excuse me. I'm going to assume that you guys are in here, and so can we go ahead and I'm going to have. Let's see. Who do I know? Let's see. Madison Bike. No, Madison Bikes. Let's go. Who has a YouTube account that I can get on here? Let's go Sierra. If you have a YouTube account, go ahead and log in and join it. And Isabella Lopez, if you have a YouTube account, you can go ahead and log in. Go ahead and do that as well. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's me, Mr. Cantelou. I'm away from you today, but that's okay because we're still going to go through the information. So yesterday you should have copied down these vocab words. Juvenile rights, those are rights of people under the age of 18. Juvenile rights, those are your rights. You're under the age of 18, and so you have juvenile rights, or rights of people under the age of 18. Executive privilege is the belief that conversations between the president and his aides are confidential. Those are the belief that conversations between the president and his aides are confidential. Landmark. A landmark is an important or unique decision, event, fact, or discovery, and we'll talk all about all of that later. To prosecute is to carry out legal action against an accused person to prove his or her guilt. Okay? To prove his or her guilt. All right. Judicial review. The power of the U.S. courts to examine laws or actions of the legislative and executive branches of the government and to determine whether such actions are consistent with the U.S. Constitution. So, those are our vocab words for the day. You should have got those down yesterday. Let's keep moving forward. Welcome to Mr. Cantelou Monday. I know it's Tuesday, but yesterday you guys worked on the last stage of prep works for me, and so today you're going to be working on getting the notes from yesterday. Okay, you're getting the notes from yesterday. We're going to give them to you today, and that way you guys are caught up. Going around right now should be your homework and your guided notes, and we'll be going through that today as a class to make sure we can get through it. Okay. So our agenda, we just completed our do now, and now I'm in my welcome and expectations and agenda. We're going to go through this, take us a couple minutes, and then we'll get into our essential questions, standards, and objectives, followed by our lecture on the landmark Supreme Court cases, and then we'll work on homework. All right. We'll get on to homework, and then we'll see if you guys can win, beat the teacher. Okay. My expectations today are that we're going to have a great class. We're going to learn something new. We're going to have fun. We're going to follow champs, and we're going to win, beat the teacher. Guys, we're going to have a great class every class. I mean, that's my expectation. I expect that we have great classes because I believe that if we have a great class, we can definitely learn. We're going to learn something new. Guys, I always want to challenge you to figure out to learn something new. No matter what day it is, try to learn something new. It's important to try that. We're going to have fun today, guys. Well, always it's important in education that we have fun. If we're having fun, we're definitely learning. And then we're going to follow champs. Today, our champs for today is communication. We're going to be at level 0. Level 0. For help, what we're going to do is I'm going to have people around the room who have a YouTube account to message me those questions. So if you have a question, write it down on a piece of paper, and then we'll have people at the end of class type those questions into the chat function, and I can communicate with you through that. Our activity today is we are working today. We are working today to work on notes and our movement. We're going to stay in our seats. For participation today, we're going to participate by paying attention, taking notes. All right, if we can follow all of these things, it can only do one thing for us, and that will lead us to success. All right, it will lead us to success. Hey, Vicente, stop typing into chat, please. Thank you. All right, so I do need to know who's going to help me with the questions today. Do I have some people signed on? Who are some of the people that are going to help me today with questions? All right, I'm sure we'll get somebody in here in a few minutes that can help you guys out. Until then, let's get moving. So, let's get into our standard. Our standard for today is to analyze the significance and outcomes of landmark Supreme Court cases, including but not limited to Marbury v. Madison, Pleasy v. Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, Gideon v. Wainwright, Miranda versus Arizona, Regault, Tinker versus Des Moines, Hazelwood versus Kilmer, United States versus Nixon, and Bush versus Gore. My essential questions is, what is the significance of we skipped two there. That's not cool. What is the significance of the following Supreme Court cases? So we're going to go through those Supreme Court cases today and to figure out what their significance is. My objective today is we're going to learn about the impact of landmark Supreme Court cases. All right. You guys ready to get into it? Okay, this is what you're going to need to do. Go ahead and get out your guided notes. I'm pulling mine up now. Okay. So you get out your guided notes. It should look just like this. If you don't have it with you, if you haven't been given one, you can follow along on the online version. As you can see, mine's loading in. So the answers that are going to come up for it are going to show up. The answers for the blocks, most of them are going to show up in the PowerPoint. So it's important that we pay a bit attention to our PowerPoint. Some of them will not, however. Some of them will only show up on the through the lecture and through the paper. So you need to pay attention to both, and that way you know what's going on. Everyone understand? Okay. Let's get going. There have been several landmark or important and unique U.S. Supreme Court cases that have had a huge impact on American society and government. The judicial opinions or the judgment by the court have changed the way the government can operate, and they have helped protect our freedoms. What does landmark mean, and what are judicial opinions? So a landmark is an important or unique U.S. Supreme Court case. So when you think about this, I want you to think about landmarks in the city of Jacksonville. What are some things that stand out? Maybe it's a dinosaur on Beach Boulevard. We all know what that looks like. We've probably all seen it. Maybe it's the TIAA Bank Field. We've all seen that. It's a giant stadium in Jacksonville. You can't miss it. You also can't miss the ocean or the river. They're all landmarks that you can see from a long ways away, and they're unique. They're definite. You can understand them. In the same way, Supreme Court cases, or landmark Supreme Court cases, are cases that stand out, and they have a huge impact on our society. They change the way we think and the way our government works. Judicial opinions are judgments of the court. So when a court has a question or they have a problem and they go through the process of hearing it, they look to see, or we wait until we see a judicial opinion or a judge or a ruling by the court or a judgment by the court. So whatever the judges decide becomes the ruling. It's their judicial opinion. The first landmark case that we're going to study, and it's the first landmark case in the United States history, is Marbury v. Madison. In 1803, the court, this case took place in 1803. The court case is one of the most important cases in the history of the United States. When the Founding Fathers wrote down the Constitution, they made sure that each branch had checks and balances over the other branches. However, it was not clear who would be the final decision maker when it came to questions about the Constitution. So, we'll learn a little bit later on that our government's broken up into three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. At its founding, the executive and the legislative branches had lots of power, and they could check each other. They could use their balance to keep each other in check. All right, so not one branch was too strong. However, one branch was very weak, and that was the judicial branch, until Marbury versus Madison. Marbury versus Madison established that the Supreme Court, or the judicial branch, had the power of judicial review. This allowed the Supreme Court to determine whether or not laws and actions of the legislative and executive branches are legal and that they follow the Constitution. If the laws or actions go against the Constitution, the Supreme Court can declare it null and void or invalid. Okay? Vicente, I need you to stop playing around in the chat bar. Thank you. Hayden, you as well. Alright, so what was the impact of Marbury v. Madison? Well, the impact of Marbury v. Madison is that it established judicial review. What is judicial review? Well, judicial review is the power of the Supreme Court to determine whether or not laws and actions of the legislative and executive branches are legal. Okay? So what is the impact of Marbury v. Madison? It establishes judicial review. What is judicial review? It's the power of the court to determine if laws or actions are constitutional. All right, our next one is not on our paper, but I still need you to follow along because it's a very important case. Dred Scott versus Sandford. Dred Scott was a former slave, and when he escaped freedom, he fled to the north, where he sued for his right to be a citizen. All right, he said, I was born in the United States, I'm going to be a citizen, I want to be a citizen, I have all the rights and privileges thereof. I don't want to end up as a slave again. I'm a citizen of the United States. Well, in Dred Scott versus Sandford, the Supreme Court ruled on his case. And they said slaves were not citizens of the United States. In fact, they were property. All right, so it was a very bad decision by the Supreme Court. They said that if you were a slave, you were no more than property, you weren't a citizen. And so this is terrible for Dred Scott. I mean, this is going to lead back to his time as a slave. This is going to put him back in enslavement. He escaped, and now he's going to be sent back because slaves are property. It's like somebody's property had gotten away and was being returned to him. And it really is a terrible moment in American history. It's a moment we look back and say, oh my goodness, how was that possibly approved? Who could have done that? But it does lead to the 14th Amendment. So we're doomed to repeat history unless we do something about it. Unless we learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. Well, we learned from it. The 14th Amendment defined that all people born or naturalized in the United States are U.S. citizens. All right, and then therefore they're entitled to all the rights. So while the Dred Scott case is really sad and depressing, it really is a real negative time in our country, it helps lead to the 14th Amendment, which is one of the greatest pieces of legislation ever written anywhere in the world that says, look, if you're born here, raised here, you're protected by the laws here. And that everybody is equal to those laws. Everyone that's a citizen has those rights. That's a very powerful thing for our government to say, especially off the heels of a civil war where we fought against each other. So this is a very powerful moment. Okay. Moving on to the next one. Plessy versus Ferguson. In 1896, the Supreme Court reviewed Plessy versus Ferguson. In 1890, Louisiana passed a law that required white people and black people to sit in separate train cars. This is a form of segregation, or separating people based on characteristics like race. Homer Plesey, a U.S. citizen who was 1/8 black, purchased a first-class ticket to sit in the whites-only rail car with the intentions of being arrested. So if you do something against the law, in intention to be arrested, to raise awareness of unfairness of a law, we have a special vocab word we use for that. I want you to go ahead and write that down. So what do we call it when you break the law in order to show that the law is unjust or unfair? Matthew Velez, I'd call on you and I'd ask you, what do you think it is? And hopefully you would say, well, Mr. Cantelou, it's pretty easy. That means civil dissidence. Civil dissidence is what Mr. Plesey was practicing there in Ferguson in 1890. And I'd say, great job, Matt. Matthew Velez. Here you go. I'll give you a big high five, air high five. All right. So he was arrested. He argued that the law violated the 13th and 14th Amendments, specifically the 14th clause about equal protection of the laws. The Supreme Court heard the case and decided that separate but equal segregation was not discrimination. So, the court heard the case and said that as long as there are accommodations for both groups, segregation is legal. Okay? So, for instance, this created white and people of color water fountains. It created white and people of color stores. It created schools that were for whites and blacks. So it created different services for people, okay? Different services for people. As long as there was a white one and a black one, or a white one and a person of colored one, then it was legal. Segregation is constitutional, is what Plesey versus Ferguson said. And again, it's another terrible ruling, okay? Another terrible ruling, but we'll see it gets reversed pretty soon. But it said segregation was not discrimination. It was, in fact, constitutional. Okay, that's Plesey versus Ferguson. But we're going to see that it gets, in some ways, repealed in 1954 with the case of Brown versus Board of Education. In 1954, the Supreme Court reviewed Brown versus Board of Education. At this time, students went to different schools because of their race. This was another type of segregation. And it was legal according to separate but equal. But many of the all-white schools and all-black schools were similar throughout the country. But there were still many all-black schools that had much lower quality facilities and teachers. Often black children had to travel far to get to their schools. Linda Brown was a student in Topeka, Kansas, and had to travel very far to get to her school, even though there was an all-white school in her neighborhood. Her family sued the school district, saying that segregation prevented equal protection under the law. The main question of the case was, does the separation of children in public schools only on the basis of race deny that minority children of equal protection to the laws granted by the 14th Amendment? The Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal segregation was not equal in public education. Okay, so separate but equal, all right? In Brown versus Board of Education, all right? In Brown versus Board of Education, they said that education could not be segregated. That there couldn't be an all-white school and an all-black school. You couldn't separate people based on race. It said segregation is unconstitutional. It was a very powerful moment in the country. It desegregated the schools. It caused a lot of turmoil. People were very upset. It led to riots. It led to fighting. But eventually, it led to a much better society as black people and white people were allowed to go to school together. If you want to see a cool movie about this, you can check out Remember the Titans. It's all about the desegregation of a high school. All right. That's Brown versus Board of Education. Let's keep moving. Gideon versus Wainwright. In 1963, the Supreme Court reviewed Gideon versus Wainwright. Clarence Earl Gideon was arrested and accused of stealing beer and wine from a pool room in Panama City, Florida. All right. He gets arrested from stealing from a bar. The original Florida man right here. Gideon was poor and could not afford a lawyer. He asked for the judge to appoint a lawyer for him, but the judge refused. Gideon was forced to defend himself, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in jail. He petitioned the Supreme Court, and they agreed to hear his case. The question was, did the state's court's failure to appoint a lawyer for Gideon violate his right to a fair trial and due process of law as protected by the 6th and 14th Amendments? The court upheld the Sixth Amendment, right, that all defendants must be appointed a lawyer if they cannot afford their own attorney. So, in Gideon versus Wainwright, Gideon is a lawyer. Gideon has to defend himself, guys. He has to defend himself against a professional lawyer. There's no way he's going to win. He ends up losing, gets 5 years in jail. But he petitions the Supreme Court and says, I deserve a right to an attorney. That's my amendment. That's my Sixth Amendment right, is I have a right to an attorney. Just because I can't afford one doesn't mean I don't have that right. And so, that's why it's part of your Miranda rights. The Supreme Court overruled it and said, yes, you deserve a right to an attorney. You have a right to an attorney even if you can't afford one. So, we call these people public defenders. They are given to people even if they cannot afford an attorney. Moving on to Miranda v. Arizona. In 1966, the Supreme Court reviewed Miranda versus Arizona. Ernesto Miranda, I finally got that right. Ernesto Miranda was a poor Mexican immigrant living in Arizona. A woman accused Miranda of committing a crime against her. He was arrested and questioned for 2 hours. When he was arrested, the police did not inform Miranda of his right to be silent, and he signed a confession. After being questioned, he was convicted and sentenced to 20 to 30 years in prison. He appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court, saying that the confession could not be used as evidence because he was not informed of his rights, which is a violation of the Fifth Amendment right to no self-incrimination. The question was, does the police practice of questioning individuals without notifying them of their right to a lawyer and their protection against self-incrimination violate the Fifth Amendment? The Supreme Court upheld the Fifth Amendment right protection and self-incrimination. This is where the term Miranda rights come from. So, Miranda rights says that you have rights even if you don't know about them, all right? And police must read their rights at the time of arrest. So, the police must say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. So, those are your Miranda rights. You have a right to an attorney, and you have a right to not self-incriminate. Okay? So the self-incrimination piece comes in here and shows that you cannot self-incriminate. Even if you don't know what your rights are, you still have rights under the U.S. Constitution. Make sense? Okay, now we're going to talk about some that impacted people like you, people that are minors, right? You're under 18, so let's talk about those. All right, in 1966, the Supreme Court reviewed Henry Galt. Gerald Galt was a 15-year-old boy who was arrested and taken into custody for making an offensive prank phone call without notifying his parents. He was found guilty and sentenced to a juvenile detention center. He tried to appeal, but Arizona did not allow an appeal process for juveniles. The question was, were the procedures used to commit arrest Galt constitutional due to due process clause of the 14th Amendment? The Supreme Court ruled that the juvenile court must follow the 14th Amendment. So what's the impact of Galt? Well, Galt states, that minors have the same rights as adults. So make sure you're writing this stuff down, guys. Minors have the same rights as adults in criminal cases. So regalt, minors have the same rights as adults in criminal cases. So if you guys got charged right now with a crime, you'd have the same rights as adults in criminal cases. Excuse me, guys. You're not asking questions right now in the chat bar. You're waiting till the end of class, correct? Thank you. Tinker versus Des Moines. Tinker versus Des Moines. In 1968, the Supreme Court reviewed Tinker versus Des Moines. John and Mary Beth Tinker attended public school in Des Moines, Iowa. Their school did not allow students to wear armbands to protest the Vietnam War. The Tinkers wore them anyway. After refusing to remove the armbands, the Tinkers were suspended until they agreed to remove them. The parents sued the school district, stating that the students were just exercising their right to free speech. The question was, does a ban against wearing of armbands in public schools as a form of symbolic protest violate the First Amendment freedom of speech protection? The Supreme Court upheld the students' First Amendment right to engage in symbolic speech in school. So what's the impact of Tinker versus Des Moines? Well, the impact is that students have the right to free speech and symbolic speech if it doesn't interrupt the learning environment. So, you guys can protest, right? You can protest. You can assemble in schools. You have a right to speech. However, if it interrupts or disrupts the learning environment, it's not constitutional. What Tinker versus Des Moines says is that you have rights to speech, you have right to petition. However, those rights cannot interrupt the learning environment of other students. All right? And we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about U.S. versus Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a president, and in 1974, he had a case he was charged by the United States, okay, by the United States government. Nixon was charged. President Nixon was found to be involved in a break-in the Democratic National Committee headquarters, trying to gain information that would help him be reelected as president. The rule of law applies to presidents, but Nixon argued that he had executive privilege or the belief that conversations between the president and his aides are private. Nixon had a tape recorder to record conversations that he had in the Oval Office, but when he refused to turn it in, the prosecution believed that he recorded. The prosecution believed he recorded conversations that would show he had discussed doing illegal things like breaking into the DNC headquarters. So, Nixon's the president. He's afraid he's going to lose the election, so what he does is he spies on the Democratic National Committee headquarters. So people get caught breaking in and taking material from the headquarters. They say that Nixon told them to do it, or Nixon gets charged with it. He denies it. The court demands that he turns over recordings from his office. Every U.S. president records meetings in their office. Those tapes are then reviewed. If the president needs to listen to something again, he can review those tapes and make sure he has the information he needs. So the court asked for those tapes. Nixon said they couldn't have it because of executive privilege. Executive privilege is the belief that conversations between the president and his aides, people that are very important to his cabinet, his advisors, are private. So he can have a conversation, let's say about Area 51, and we can say, oh, we want to hear the tapes about it, but the president says that's executive or privilege. That's information that he gets to know and his aides get to know, but we do not get to know, okay? So he said that conversation about the DNC was executive privilege, and he didn't want to turn over that information to the U.S. government. He wanted to keep that private. The prosecution believed that was his confession, or that was evidence enough that he was doing something illegal. The Supreme Court said, so what happens, what's the outcome of this? The question was, is the president's right to protect certain information using his executive privilege power completely protected from judicial review? The Supreme Court said no. they said executive privilege is limited by law. So they said elected officials must obey the law. They can't hide things if it's against the law. So him hiding information about breaking the law would have been illegal, and they could have seized the information. But President Nixon decided to step down so he wouldn't be impeached. Okay. Hazelwood versus Kilmer. In 1987, the Supreme Court reviewed Hazelwood versus Kilmer. Remember when I told you about Tinker versus Des Moines, about your freedom of speech in school? Well, here we're going to reference back to it. Hazelwood East High School had a journalism class that was in charge of putting out a school newspaper. The teacher sent the paper to the principal to review. The principal did not like two of the articles that he had them removed before the paper was printed. The students thought that this was a violation of their freedom of speech. The question was, did the principal's deletion of the articles violate the students' right under the First Amendment? The U.S. Supreme Court determined that the First Amendment does not protect all types of student speech in school. So, the answer to this one, guys, is free speech or press may be limited by a principal or school board if it disrupts the learning environment. So, your free speech can be limited if it disrupts the learning environment. Make sure you know that, okay? So, just as we saw in Tinker vs. Des Moines, where you have rights as a U.S. citizen, even though you're a minor, you have rights of free speech in school, it can also be limited in school. Your rights to free speech can also be limited in school under this law. Okay. And then finally, impact of Bush versus Gore. In 2000, the Supreme Court reviewed Bush versus Gore. George W. Bush and Al Gore were both running for president. The vote was so close in Florida. Guys, it was inside what we call the margin of error, which means that it is within 2% either way, okay? Within 2% either way. It's only a few votes, all right? That Al Gore, who was losing at the time, was allowed to pick any counties you'd like to have to do a recount. So he picked 2 counties or 3 counties, or however many counties he needed to do a recount. So in a couple of counties he lost that was really close, he wanted to do a recount. According to Florida election laws, the recount was not done in time, and ultimately Bush was declared the winner. Gore appealed to the courts. He said this isn't fair, so he sued. He went to the courts, asking that all votes not counted by a voting machine be recounted by hand. Bush argued that the question was, did the Supreme Court violate Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution by making new election law? Do manual recounts without consistent standards violate the equal protection and due process clauses of the Constitution? The Supreme Court determined that states cannot violate the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment when undertaking election recounts. What this basically means, let me dive this down in here, guys, a little bit, because it's a little wordy. Okay. So in the election of 2000, where George W. Bush ran against Al Gore, it was very close, and Al Gore asked for a recount. Well, the recount wasn't done in time, and so George W. Bush was declared the winner. But Al Gore didn't agree with the results, so he challenged. He called for a recount. During that recount, he asked that only votes that were counted by hand be recounted. He didn't want the machines to be counted again, only votes counted by hand. The reason he didn't want the machines counted again is because he knew that George W. Bush had more results in those machines than he did by hand. George W. Bush demanded that all the votes be counted, or none of the votes. He said all votes are equal. It doesn't matter if someone voted online someone voted and a machine counted it, or somebody voted and a human counted it. All votes are equal. Okay? So, the Supreme Court ruled with George W. Bush and said, yes, all votes are equal during an election. One vote isn't more important than another. So, when we get to this election, right, we got to think all votes are equal. That doesn't matter if it's a mail-in or if you go in person, all votes are equal. All right. Any questions? All right. If you have questions, make your way either to Romeo, or I guess Vicente, and you can type your question in there. Romeo, look around the room. Is there anybody that is not here? I don't know who King 2-3 is. Is there anybody that is not present today? Everybody's there. So everybody's there today. Okay. All right, guys. Your job now is to get started on the homework. Go ahead and get started. Chloe Sowerby's not there, Romeo? Chloe and Ava aren't there. Okay. Chloe and Ava. Alright, guys, you should have been given homework. It should look something like this. Alright. Make sure we get that done. You can go ahead and get started now. You have enough time to finish it. Go ahead and get started. Wait, did you guys not get a copy of the homework? You didn't get a copy of the homework that looks like this? Well, Cynthia, stop playing around the chat. I just need a yes or no answer. Did you guys receive the homework or not? Okay, you got a copy? Okay, good. That's all I was asking. Alright, remember, you guys need to be working on that at level 0, knock that out, and then you guys will see. I'm not making a guide for the homework. You know how to do the homework. Answer the questions. Number 3, you should be able to get that off of the guided notes pretty easily. Pretty easily. I can't give you the answers, man. You got to find them yourself, buddy. That's a pretty easy one, too. right, guys and girls, it is that time of day where you're getting ready for your electives. So I'm going to let you guys go. I wish you the best, and I will see you guys later. Have a good one. Bye.